Welcome to Life Stories. On a stormy night, millionaire William Carter stumbles upon an abandoned baby in a dark alley only to find a pendant around the child's neck, holding a picture of his wife. What follows is a heart-wrenching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption as William uncovers shocking family secrets and races against time to save both his wife and the child's future. Will he find the truth before it's too late? Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. Let's dive into a tale of mystery, sacrifice, and second chances. The rain poured down mercilessly on the city, washing the streets in a cascade of shimmering reflections. It was the kind of night where people hurried home, shielding themselves from the cold, their umbrellas forming a sea of dark canopies moving through the damp air. I had just returned from an exhausting business trip, 10 days in Geneva. Back-to-back meetings, endless negotiations. My Italian suit, usually pristine, clung to my body, soaked through despite the umbrella I carried. I longed for nothing more than the warmth of my home, the glow of the fireplace, and perhaps a quiet evening with Lauren. Yet, as I turned onto a quieter street, something unusual reached my ears, a sound that didn't belong to the rhythmic tapping of rain on pavement. A cry, faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind. I hesitated, my steps slowing. Had I imagined it? A trick of exhaustion? Perhaps. But there it was again, small, broken, desperate. A child. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Though not from the cold. A child. Out here, in this weather. I scanned the street, but the few passers-by rushed along, oblivious. The cry came from the shadows of a narrow alleyway just ahead. I hesitated. I had heard too many stories about traps set for unsuspecting victims in dark corners of the city. But something inside me refused to walk away. I stepped forward, cautiously, my shoes splashing into shallow puddles. The alley was dimly lit by a flickering street lamp at the far end. A few overturned boxes, scattered papers, a sense of abandonment. And then, there, partially sheltered by a damp, crumbling cardboard box, was a tiny bundle. I knelt, my heartbeat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. With trembling hands, I peeled back the soaked blanket wrapped around the child. A newborn. His tiny face was red from the cold, his small fists clenched, his cries weak. My chest tightened at the sight of him, so fragile, so alone. Who could do this? Who could leave a baby like this? In the middle of the night, with no one to protect him? Then I saw it. A gold chain, glinting faintly in the dim light, was fastened around the baby's neck. At the end of it hung a delicate pendant, barely larger than a coin. Something about it seemed strangely familiar. I gently turned it over, my breath catching as my eyes fell upon the tiny photograph inside. Lauren. My wife's face smiled back at me from within the locket. My mind reeled, confusion slamming into me with the force of a crashing wave. How? Why? I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the rain. My fingers traced the edges of the pendant, as if touching it would somehow bring me clarity. A storm of questions thundered in my mind. Had Lauren known about this child? Was this? No, it couldn't be. She would have told me. Wouldn't she? I looked down at the baby, his cries softening as he nestled instinctively into the warmth of my coat. His tiny fingers twitched, reaching out for something, someone. My heart clenched. No matter how this child had come to be here, no matter what secrets lay behind this moment, one thing was certain. He had been abandoned, left to the mercy of the cold, the night, and the cruelty of fate. And I, whether by chance or something greater, had found him. I stood, adjusting the baby in my arms, shielding him from the relentless rain. My mansion was not far. I needed answers. And only one person could give them to me. Lauren. As I stepped back onto the main road, the city seemed different. The neon signs, the hurried people, the wet asphalt stretching ahead, it all blurred together. unimportant. All that mattered now was the small, helpless life in my arms, and the mystery that had just begun to unfold. By the time I reached home, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and disbelief. The storm outside had worsened, wind howling through the streets like a restless spirit. But inside the warmth of my home, the contrast was stark: the crackling fireplace in the living room, the soft glow of golden light filtering through the grand chandelier above, and the familiar scent of oakwood and fresh linen. This was my sanctuary, the place I had always returned to after long trips, the place where Lauren would welcome me with a warm embrace. Tonight, however, there was no warmth. I tightened my grip on the baby in my arms as I pushed open the front door. The silence inside was almost eerie, broken only by the faint ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. Lauren, my voice echoed through the house, bouncing off the marble floors. A moment later, hurried footsteps sounded from upstairs. She was coming. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. How was I supposed to begin this conversation? What if? William. Lauren's voice was light, filled with surprise and joy. She appeared at the top of the staircase, her emerald green silk robe flowing behind her. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. She smiled, descending the steps quickly. What a wonderful sir. Her words died the moment she saw the bundle in my arms. Her face drained of color, her eyes widening in silent horror. What is that? She whispered. I had never seen my wife speechless before. Lauren Carter was a woman of confidence, of grace under pressure. But at this moment, she looked like someone who had seen a ghost. I took a deep breath and slowly unwrapped part of the blanket, revealing the baby's small, peaceful face. I found him abandoned in an alley tonight. He was wearing this. I lifted the pendant in front of her, watching her every reaction. Lauren's hands flew to her mouth as she staggered back. Lauren, I said, my voice low, steady. Why does this baby have your picture around his neck? She swayed slightly, gripping the wooden railing for support. Her breathing became uneven. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, needed to, but no words came. Tell me, I demanded, stepping closer. Who is this child? I don't know. The words were barely a whisper. Don't lie to me. My voice hardened, something between desperation and frustration taking over. This is your pendant, Lauren. The one I gave you on our first anniversary. Why does this baby have it? She shook her head, but tears welled in her eyes. Her body trembled. And for the first time in our years together, I saw real fear in her. I swear. William. She gasped suddenly, her knees buckling. Lauren. I lunged forward just in time to catch her as she collapsed against me. Her breathing was ragged, her skin cold against my touch. My heart pounded as I held her. This wasn't just shock, something was wrong. Lauren. Stay with me. Her eyelids fluttered, her fingers weakly clutching my sleeve. I didn't want you to find out this way, she murmured before her body went limp in my arms. Panic surged through me. I turned toward the staircase. Odessa. I called for our housekeeper. Call an ambulance now. Odessa. A middle-aged woman with years of experience running our household, rushed out from the dining room, gasping at the sight of Lauren. Sir. Now. My voice cracked with urgency. Within moments, the house was in chaos. The baby, now awake, began crying again, his small fists waving in the air. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart. I looked down at Lauren's face, pale and motionless in my arms. Whatever secrets she had been keeping, whatever truth she had been afraid to tell me, none of it mattered right now. Right now, I just needed her to survive. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though to me, every second had felt like an eternity. I held Lauren's hand as the paramedics worked quickly, checking her vitals, preparing her for transport. The baby's cries had softened, but his small, Helpless sobs still filled the house. I had barely processed what was happening only an hour ago. I had been walking home through the rain, exhausted from my travels. And now my entire world was unraveling. "She's stable for now," one of the paramedics informed me as they lifted Lauren onto the stretcher. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." "I'm coming with you," I said without hesitation. They nodded. And Odessa reached for the baby. "Sir, let me take care of him while you." "No," I pulled the child closer to my chest. A protectiveness I didn't quite understand taking over. "He's coming with me." Odessa hesitated but saw the determination in my face. She simply nodded and stepped aside. The ride to the hospital was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor attached to Lauren. I watched her the entire time, searching for any sign of consciousness, any indication that she would wake up and explain everything. But she remained still, her face pale, her breathing slow but steady. When we arrived, the doctors moved quickly, wheeling her away while I was left standing there in the bright, sterile hallway, the baby still wrapped in my coat. "Sir," a nurse approached me. "Are you family?" "I'm her husband, William Carter." My voice was hoarse. "What's wrong with her?" The nurse exchanged a glance with one of the doctors before answering. "Mr. Carter, your wife has been diagnosed with leukemia." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the world tilt slightly, my grip tightening around the baby. "No," I said automatically. "That can't be. Lauren, she would have told me." I stopped myself. "Would she have?" "She's been sick for a while," the doctor explained. "But it seems she hasn't been receiving treatment. The condition has worsened. Her body is weak. And without immediate intervention, she doesn't have much time." I stared at him, my mind reeling. She had known. She had been keeping this from me, suffering in silence, pretending everything was fine. What can I do?" I managed to ask. "The only chance for a cure is a bone marrow transplant," the doctor said. "And time is not on our side. A family member would be the most likely match." I swallowed hard and looked down at the baby in my arms. A possibility, one that made no sense and yet fit too perfectly into the chaos of the night, flashed through my mind. "What about him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The doctor frowned. "The baby?" "Yes," I said. "I need a DNA test. I need to know if he's connected to my wife." The medical staff looked surprised but didn't question me further. A nurse gently reached for the child. "We'll take care of him while we run the test. Mr. Carter." I hesitated but eventually let her take him, my fingers reluctant to let go. As the nurse carried him away, I exhaled shakily, running a hand through my damp hair. I needed answers. If this baby was Lauren's, was mine, then my entire life was about to change forever. Hours passed in a blur. I sat in the hospital waiting room, my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The rhythmic ticking of the clock above me felt unbearable, each second stretching endlessly. Lauren was still unconscious. The baby was undergoing tests. And I was left alone with my thoughts, none of which brought me comfort. How long had she been sick? Why had she hidden it from me? And most pressing of all, was that baby really connected to her? A sharp vibration in my pocket pulled me from my thoughts. I pulled out my phone. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "William Carter." A low, measured voice responded. "If you want to know the truth about the baby, come to the cafe across the street." Alone. A chill ran down my spine. I stood, glancing toward the corridor where Lauren lay. A part of me wanted to stay, to wait for her to wake up. But something in that voice told me I couldn't afford to hesitate. I stepped outside into the cold night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights. Across the road, a small cafe still had its doors open, its neon sign flickering slightly. I pushed open the door, scanning the few customers inside. And then I saw her. Sitting near the window was a woman. her face partially hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. As I stepped closer, she looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. Lauren. No, not Lauren. Her features were the same high cheekbones, the same sharp green eyes, but something was different. Colder. She smiled. But there was no warmth in it. You came. I slid into the chair across from her, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Who are you? She lifted her hat slightly, letting her wavy auburn hair fall over her shoulders. My name is Dana. The name meant nothing to me. You look exactly like my wife. Her smile widened. That's because I am her sister. The words were like a slap to the face. I leaned back, my mind struggling to keep up. That's not possible. Lauren doesn't have a sister. Dana tilted her head. Did she tell you that? Or did she just never tell you the truth? I exhaled sharply. Why would she hide something like that? Dana shrugged. Because I was the sister she wanted to forget. The one who was left behind. Her gaze darkened. Lauren got everything, a good family, a future. I got nothing. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. And the baby? Her smile turned sharp. He's mine now. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. What do you mean? Yours. Dana leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. He was meant to be Lauren's. But she doesn't deserve him. I took him so she could feel what it's like to lose everything. My blood ran cold. You kidnapped him? She didn't even flinch. I rescued him from the life she would have given him. A life where she kept secrets. Where she lied. She never even told you about me. What else has she hidden? I clenched my fists. Where is he? Dana's expression shifted slightly. Safe. But I won't let you take him back. She stood suddenly, knocking over her chair. Before I could react, she was already moving toward the door. I surged to my feet. Dana. Stop. But then, everything spun. A dizzying wave of nausea hit me like a truck. My vision blurred. My limbs felt impossibly heavy. Dana turned back, her expression unreadable. I was wondering when that would kick in. The coffee. I barely registered the sound of the door swinging shut as I collapsed. Darkness swallowing me whole. Darkness wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. My body felt sluggish. My limbs heavy as though they were submerged underwater. The world around me spun violently, a nauseating swirl of colors and sounds. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear muffled voices, footsteps retreating, the faint chime of a door opening and closing. I fought against the weight pressing down on me, my mind clawing through the haze. The coffee, she had drugged me. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through my veins, cutting through the fog just enough for me to force my eyes open. The cafe was empty. My chair lay overturned beside me, a dull pain throbbing at the back of my head where I had hit the floor. But none of it mattered. The baby. She had taken the baby. I lurched to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. I stumbled toward the door, shoving it open with more force than necessary. The cold night air hit me like a slap, shocking my senses back into clarity. My pulse pounded as I scanned the deserted street, searching for any sign of Dana. Nothing. Then, a low voice from the shadows. She ran east, toward the old district. I whirled around to find a man slumped against the alley wall, his coat tattered, his eyes bloodshot from years of hard living. A homeless man. What did you see? I demanded, stepping closer. He coughed into his sleeve, eyeing me warily. A woman in a hat. Rushed out of here carrying something wrapped in a coat. Looked like she was in a hurry. He motioned with his chin. She took off that way. Without a second thought, I pulled a handful of bills from my pocket and pressed them into his palm. Thank you. I ran. The old district was only a few blocks away, but in my weakened state, it felt like miles. The streets were darker here, the buildings older, their facades worn down by time and neglect. I pushed forward, my breaths ragged. my head still swimming from whatever Dana had slipped into my drink. I turned a corner and spotted a flicker of movement ahead, a figure darting into an abandoned building. A bundle clutched tightly in their arms. Dana. I didn't slow down. I reached the door just as it slammed shut. My hands fumbled against the rusted handle, pushing hard until it gave way. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the wooden floor creaking beneath my weight. A single bare bulb flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows along the peeling walls. Dana stood at the far end of the room, cradling the baby. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice eerily calm. I took a step forward, my hands clenched at my sides. "Give him to me, Dana." She held him tighter. "He's better off with me. He's not yours," I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You took him from his mother." She let out a bitter laugh. "Lauren doesn't deserve him. She doesn't deserve anything." I swallowed the rage rising in my throat. "This isn't about Lauren anymore. This is about an innocent child. You can't undo the past by hurting him." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. But it lasted only a moment. "I won't let you take him," she whispered. And then, before I could react, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a match. My stomach lurched as she struck it against the wall, the tiny flame dancing in her fingers. I'd rather burn it all down than let her win. She tossed the match into the corner of the room. The fire spread instantly. The fire caught fast. Within seconds, orange and red tendrils licked up the walls, turning the old, dry wood into kindling. The heat hit me like a wave, searing my skin, filling my lungs with thick smoke. The baby let out a terrified wail, his tiny cries piercing through the crackling flames. "Dana, stop," I shouted over the roaring fire. "This isn't the way." But she didn't listen. Her hands were shaking, her breath ragged. But her eyes burned with something far worse than the fire around us: pain. Years of resentment. An anger so deep it had rotted her from the inside. "You don't understand," she said, her voice hoarse as the smoke thickened. "She took everything from me. William. My life. My family. My chance. And now she gets to have him too." She clutched the baby tighter, her fingers trembling. "No. Not this time." The fire had already spread to the ceiling, sparks raining down like embers from a collapsing sky. If I didn't act now, we were all going to die. "Dana. Please." I begged, my voice raw. "You can hate Lauren. You can hate me. But don't do this to the baby. He doesn't deserve it." She looked down at him then, and for a moment, I saw something crack in her expression. A hesitation. The flames grew higher. The heat was unbearable now. The exit was still open behind me, but not for long. I had to take my chance. With a sudden burst of movement, I lunged forward. Dana gasped, stepping back. But I was faster. I grabbed her wrist, my other arm wrapping around the baby, trying to pry him from her grip. "No," she shrieked, struggling. But she was weak from the smoke. She coughed violently, and her grip loosened. I pulled the baby free, wrapping him in my coat to shield him from the embers falling around us. I turned toward the door, but a groaning sound from above made my stomach drop. The ceiling. It was about to give way. I spun back to Dana. She was swaying on her feet, dazed, her face streaked with soot. The flames behind her cast a long, flickering shadow. "Come with me." I reached for her, but she shook her head. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. The ceiling buckled. I had no choice. Holding the baby tightly against my chest, I ran. The moment I crossed the threshold, a deafening crash echoed behind me. A rush of heat and smoke burst outward as the roof caved in, swallowing the room in a blazing inferno. I stumbled onto the pavement, gasping for air, the baby's cries still sharp in my ears. My lungs burned. My limbs felt like lead. But I didn't stop running until I was far enough away to collapse onto my knees. I turned, watching the building crumble in on itself. Flames shot into the sky, black smoke billowing upward. Sirens screamed in the distance, flashing lights approaching through the darkness. And Dana. She was gone. The fire had taken her, along with all the bitterness she had carried for so long. I looked down at the baby, his tiny face streaked with ash, his eyes still wet with frightened tears. But he was alive. He had survived. And now, I had to make sure Lauren did too. Clutching the baby close, I stood on shaking legs and turned toward the flashing lights. The fight wasn't over yet. The hospital room was silent except for the steady beeping of the monitors. I sat beside Lauren, her hand resting lightly in mine, our son cradled safely in her arms. After everything, the fire, the revelations, the near loss, we were here. Together. Lauren's eyes fluttered open, tired but filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, peace. She turned her head slowly, looking down at the baby nestled against her chest. A small, fragile life that had been through so much already. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yes, he is." Tears welled in her eyes as she traced a soft fingertip over his tiny cheek. "I thought I lost him." I tightened my grip on her hand. "You didn't. You both survived. That's all that matters now." A quiet moment passed between us. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but they no longer had power over us. We had fought through the darkness and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but still standing. Lauren took a deep breath and met my gaze. "What happens now?" I smiled softly. "Now, we live. We love. And we make sure he grows up knowing he was never alone." The baby stirred slightly in her arms, letting out a peaceful sigh. I leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Lauren's forehead, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that everything would be okay. Because no matter what we had lost, we had gained something even greater, a second chance. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming life stories.